Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the Reading Philosophy tag, which was created by Brandon's Bookshelf. I wasn't tagged, but he's a fairly new channel, so I thought I'd do this as kind of a shout out to his channel. And obviously I'm putting off doing the tags, I've actually been tagged. Question number 1 is, what's most important, a good character, plot, or message? I think if you are reading nonfiction for information, message is the information, so that's most important. I think in fiction it's just a matter of both taste and genre, because certain genres have a set plot. A cozy mystery or a genre romance hits the same notes regardless of who's writing it and what it is, and it's just the elements that are plugged in. But yeah, my preference is actually setting though, and not character or plot when it comes to fiction. Question number 2 is, should one read books with ideas and opinions that they disagree with? And I think if you are reading to find out about a particular topic or issue, I think that's worthwhile. I think if you are assigning reading for children in school or for students at university, yes, that's important. I think if you're reading for fun, who cares? Question number 3 is, as tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? I think there is always value to having hard copies of things because things can very easily get destroyed. I think it's a question, even technology from a few years ago, how many people can still use a floppy disk? And think of all the great games that we had on floppy disks 30 years ago. Where are they now? I mean, a lot of them are still available, but you know what I mean? I think technology changes all the time. So I imagine, barring a huge environmental collapse where you can't use paper, but I think there'll be paper substitutes, so yeah. Question number 4 is, how important are summaries, review, and art in your book choosing? I used to follow newspaper book reviews 20 years ago. I don't really anymore, but I do need to hear somewhere from someone. It all matters. Something has to catch your attention, and any of those can catch the attention. So they're all important to various levels. Just depends. Question 5, should anyone ever skim or scan a book? Yes, because if you're looking for specific information, you're going to scan the parts that you don't need. And I mean, if it's fiction that you're reading for fun, again, who cares? I feel like there are a lot of people who read things like the giant epic fantasies that follow multiple characters. And if somebody doesn't care about one of the characters, I don't see why they shouldn't just skip over the sections about the characters they don't care about. There isn't an exam at the end. If you're a student, I think, go read the book, you ought to, but otherwise, I don't think it matters. But, if you're doing something, if you're doing a repair that's life or death, don't just skim, read it. If you're working on the electrical panel in your house, please don't cause a fire because you didn't read that properly. Read that in its entirety. Question number 6, should reading always be enjoyable? No, because if you're reading the warning label on something, you're not getting joy out of reading the warning label, but you're reading it because I guess there's joy in knowing that you're not going to overdose on medication, and being alive is joyful, so maybe there's enjoyment in that. But no, I don't think reading has to be a fun activity. I think a lot of times it's a practical activity. And I mean, even if warning labels don't count, if we're talking about books, if I'm reading the guidebook to my car, it's usually not fun. It's usually because something's wrong and I'm trying to figure out what is wrong with the exhaust system in my car. And again, it's maybe enjoyable in the sense that if I know, I get joy out of knowing what's wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily joy. Question number 7 is it important to be well-read? I think if you are going to present yourself as someone who's well-read, you ought to actually be well-read. And I think if you're going to present yourself as an expert on a specific topic, you ought to be well-read around that topic. And what that means is obviously going to vary from topic to topic. But otherwise, I mean, if you're not presenting yourself as an expert and it's not fun for you, then who cares? Then no, I don't think it's important. Question number 8 is, what is your book buying process? When I hear about a new book that I want to read, I go and check to see if it's at the library. Luckily for me, usually it is. My library is, I'm lucky enough to live in a city with an extensive public library system, which I think has the highest circulation in the world the last time I checked. They used to have books in almost 150 languages. It's 40 languages now. Unfortunately, they just changed that a couple of years ago. But still, the 40 languages encompasses a lot of material. And so I'm very lucky in that I can find most of it that way. So if I have read something and I know that I'm going to either reread it or it has information that I'm going to want to look up later, then I will go and see what my opportunities are to buy it, because sometimes things are out of print and you don't have a lot of options. So I research various places to buy, and then I consider both price, convenience, and the relative evil of the companies involved, I guess. Question number 6 is, what is your reading process? I feel like I've said this all the time during the past 2 years. Normally I read on transit during a commute or at the gym, but with the COVID situation, I've been reading at home, so I feel like I read less and more sloppily is maybe not the right word, but I definitely don't dedicate the same amount of blocks of time that I would if I was commuting or if I was at the gym. So I'm definitely not a pour hot chocolate and sit in a cozy chair type reader, or one of those sit at a table and take notes constantly either. Question number 10 is, how do you use what you read? Well, I mean, it depends. If I'm reading a cookbook, I use that to make dinner. If I'm reading the guidebook for my car, I'm using that because I'm using this example because my car did overheat a while ago and I did look up the car. And if it's the usual kind of political nonfiction about current events, and I use that to argue with people at the dog park about current events. So, yeah. Question number 11 is, if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? I think I would be less likely to read practical material like a cookbook or the guidebook to the car, because the process of reading isn't the reason to read any of those things. Similarly, if you could download an encyclopedia where you need to know what happened when, the dates, the times, the population of different cities, I think all of that would be great to have in your head. I think reading where the process is the point, which, poetry, fiction, yeah, you'd still read, or I'd still read that kind of thing because it's the process, not the information. Question number 12, what are your views on rereading a book? Well, if I want to double check information, obviously I'm going to reread the bits of that. And I reread some of my favorite fiction every year, like All Quiet on the Western Front. I've been rereading at least once a year, sometimes multiple times a year since I was 15. So yes, I'm very pro rereading. I don't consider it a waste of time, but I do read fairly quickly. So I appreciate that people who are slow readers, who maybe only read 10 or 20 books a year, aren't going to make such a high percentage of their yearly rereading, but fortunately that's not the case for me, so I reread. Question number 13 is, what makes a good book? Does it have interesting information? Does it have useful information? Is it fun? Is it engaging? I think any of those things. It certainly doesn't have to have all of those things, but you have to have at least one of those things. Question number 14 is, what makes a book bad? Misinformation. Also, terrible formatting. Also, doing a terrible job of translating, because I talked about a book a couple of weeks ago which was so poorly translated that it had some of the original word order from the original language, and it was a language in which the word order is completely different than English, so you cannot do that. That makes a book bad. But again, it doesn't make the original book bad, yeah. Well. Question number 15 is, how do you feel about not finishing a book? I have not finished reading my car manual. I just read the parts about the things I needed to know, and I don't think that matters. Also, I don't think it matters if, like the example I used about the fantasy novels that are 10 books and they're all 1,000 pages and they follow different characters. If somebody doesn't care about one of those characters, it does not matter. It's not who cares? Also, especially for people who either read slowly or don't have a lot of time to read. If you're not enjoying something or it doesn't give you what you thought you were going to get out of it, there should be no shame in putting that down, because life is finite and time is finite. So life is too short to read bad books, I guess, unless you're fortunate enough to have a lot of free time or to read very quickly, or both. Question number 16, should the author's personal life matter at all? And that, I think, depends on what you mean by matter. If the author is alive and you know that they are putting their time or their money or their fame towards something that you consider politically or socially regressive or that's genuinely dangerous. There are ways to certainly mitigate that, but if you don't choose to mitigate that, especially if you don't have used bookstores, for example, or something like that, yeah, sure, boycott them. A good boycott has worked in certain situations, hasn't in others, so might as well try if you can. If the person's dead, I don't think it matters on some grand moral level, but there are definitely things that I can't get past, like David Eddings or Marion Zimmer Bradley. They're dead, so it doesn't matter, but I don't want to read the books of somebody I don't want to be inside the head of someone who kept their children in a cage or who was a child molester, which are what happened with those two. But I mean, even with things like that, I'm a hypocrite because there are some people whose material I engage with who were, they were murderers, they were rapists. I think when they're dead, it's child harm is my hard line. I just don't want to be inside their head. But if the question is, should it matter at all? It's one of those things where everybody's line in the sand is different, though. So there are definitely authors and artists that I engage with that I know other people would be having a hard boycott on. And there's a certain Canadian author who I just don't like because I think she's rude in interviews and has been. And there was one interview in 1996 where I thought she was rude to the interviewer and rude to the waitress because it was a lunch interview. I don't know why I'm being vague. It was Margaret Atwood when she was being interviewed for lunch with Jan Wong. And I just don't buy her books. I'll read them from the library. And that's not even anything offensive. I think she's done things that people find offensive since then. But I just thought, this is not a nice person. And, I'm not boycotting her. But when I see her, I think of that interview. And because that's the first association, it's turned me off of her. And that has nothing to do with any of the usual things that I think people talk about when they're boycotting. But when they're saying, I'm never going to read this author, and I don't think I ever went in and said, I'm never going to buy anything from her again. But it is something I think of. So if they put their personal lives out there, then I think it matters in that they're making it matter. Because there are plenty of authors who I know nothing about their personal lives. Actually, I saw an author recently whose memoir I had put on hold at the library before it even was published. And then I was following her Instagram, and she made what I would consider to be imperialist comments within a cultural sphere that I'm more connected with than she is. So I feel okay judging the way she was judging that. And I sent the book back to the library unread because I just thought, you don't actually understand the situation that you're talking about. And yeah, I don't know. And authors choose to put that out there. So question number 17 is, if you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? And that would be memoirs, because so many people lie in memoirs. You'd still be getting to read fiction. If you read the memoir of a neurosurgeon, they'll probably talk about neurosurgery. If you read the memoir of a poet, it may be in poetry. If you read the memoir of a cartoonist, it'll probably be a graphic memoir. If you read the memoir of a politician, you'll get some political history. You read the memoir of a military figure, you'll get some military history. So you will get to read every other genre within that genre. Question number 18. Do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? Not exactly intentionally, but occasionally I will put books on hold at the library and then forget why I've put them on hold, especially if there's a long queue or if they're just not published yet. So I do sort of read some books that I don't know anything about, but just because I've forgotten, not because I didn't actually do any research about it. Question 19 is, what author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into, or why? I find inspirational self-help to be really groan-inducing. Sometimes I'll be tempted to pick up something. I like to read organizing books, and I sometimes like to read fitness books, and you do see a weird amount of spiritual crossover in both of those. And I can handle a little bit of that, but too much woo-woo, and yeah, I cannot handle that. And I can't tell you how many times I've picked up what looks like a straightforward organizing book, and it turns out that it's very Buddhist or Christian or New Agey, and it's like, why? I just wanted to read about organizing things. So yeah, inspirational self-help. Question number 20. Do you think everyone should read? Why? I think everyone should read because literacy is important. And if there is a form of reading that is accessible to you, you should engage with it. Obviously, some people have neurological issues that mean they cannot interpret symbols, in which case they can't read print or braille because if that part of the brain isn't functioning. But I mean, I think the question is really, should they read books and not, because I mean, we all read texts on our phones, right? So I don't think it's actually a literacy question. And if the question is, should we all read books? Only if you want to, but ideally when you're in school and you're required to, you would. And then the actual act of reading doesn't really matter. You can listen to them, somebody can read it to you, whatever. Live and let live. If you prefer to get your information by going to seminars, I don't think that's any lesser than reading a book about something. And sometimes I think it can be better because you can ask questions. Whereas, you know, if you see an author speak on a panel and you have a question about something, you can ask that, and you can't necessarily do that when you're reading the book. So that can be a better way to access information depending on the person's expertise that you're listening to. I don't know, it depends. Yeah, I think that's the last question. In any case, I wasn't really tagged, so I'm just so you shouldn't feel like you need to be tagged to do this either. Consider yourself tagged if you're watching this. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.